Welcome to episode 7 of the 3am Fear podcast. This story is a little different from my usual ones, or the ones that I've covered so far. It's quite interesting though, as far as I believe. I went through a ton of videos, articles, blog posts, and also court records. Almost anything that I could lay my hands on. The deeper I got into the story, the more I started to uncover. I initially thought I could cover this whole story in one episode, but there is just too much information out there. So I decided to split it into 3 parts. My whole research went in trying to figure out whether Lizzie Borden, who was suspected of killing her parents, did it or not. This is one of the most infamous cases in history. I will not tell you much now, just that let's get around with a quick summary of Lizzie Borden and her life, and then we can get to discussing the possibility of murder. If you have not heard about Lizzie Borden, then here is a quick summary. Back in the late 1800s, Lizzie Borden's father and stepmother were brutally hacked to death with an axe or a hatchet. The murder weapon was never actually recovered. Lizzie was put on trial, but after several testimonies and upon deeper review of the case, she was set free. Even though she was never found guilty, many still believe that she had done it. Why? That's unclear, although throughout her life, or at least till the days leading up to the murder, she did show some signs. Hello and welcome to the 3am Fear podcast. I'm Nikita Ferrao, mystery and thriller author. On this podcast, I talk about real crimes and real people. Due to the graphic nature of some of this content, listener discretion is advised. You can find the episode show notes on my website 3amfear.com. Let's get started. There is a popular children's song associated with Lizzie Borden and the axe murders. The jump rope song goes something like this. Lizzie Borden took an axe. She gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Now this rhyme is not exactly correct, as Lizzie Borden did not kill her parents these many times. And also, Abby Borden was her stepmother, not her real mother. People back then generally associated and created nursery songs which were associated with something bad. For instance, the song Ringa Ringa Roses is for the bubonic plague. Coming to our Bordens, Andrew Jackson Borden was born on September 13, 1822 in Fall River, Massachusetts. His family was one of the founding families in Fall River, and they made their money from cotton mills. At this time, many New England towns were growing into industrious and prosperous cities. Even with this, Andrew was from the less wealthy part of the family. It was not that all the members of his family were poor. He did have rich cousins who lived lavish lives and enjoyed royal parties. But unfortunately, Andrew was not one of them. He was not blessed with wealth by birth. While Andrew lived in the poor section of the town, his cousins lived in rich mansions. This did not stop Andrew, and he dedicated his whole life into working hard, and eventually he gained his own wealth. He manufactured and sold furniture and caskets, rented out property. He became a successful real estate person. Andrew Borden was a self-made man. By the time of his death, he was worth over $10 million in today's money. Although Andrew was a rich man, he was not the nicest. He was a no-nonsense guy. He was a penny pincher. He hoarded his money and avoided spending it on things that were not required. Andrew met Sarah Anthony Morris and got married to her on Christmas 1845. After 5 years of marriage, they were blessed with their first child, Emma Lenora Borden, born on 1st March 1851. Now I did some research online, but I couldn't find anything much on Sarah. The question that came to my mind here was, why did it take Sarah 5 years to have Emma? Today it's normal to have a child that late in marriage. But back then, and you're going to hear me say this phrase out aloud, back then, women did not have much to do. Don't feel bad or come to me with comments on independent women. I understand, I know that very well. But we have to acknowledge that back then, in the 1800s, a woman's job was to marry, give birth, and look after the house. It was what they were taught and what was expected of them. So why did it take Sarah so long to have Emma? Could she have some problem in conceiving? Now Sarah and Emma were very close. She taught her all the household work and was with her all the time. 5 years after Emma was born, Sarah was blessed with another daughter, Alice Esther Borden, born on May 3rd, 1856. Once again, 5 years. Emma was 5 and excited to have a baby in the house. But this excitement didn't last long. Just 2 months before her second birthday, Alice died of hydrocephalus. Now this problem is treatable today, but back then it took a lot of lives. 4 years after Alice's death, Sarah was blessed yet again with another child, Lizzie Andrew Borden, born on July 19, 1860. Lizzie was very well taken care of both by her mother and Emma, whom Sarah had groomed well for this day. Unfortunately, this time tragedy struck the house in a different way. Sarah died from uterine congestion and spinal disease on March 29, 1863, when Lizzie was very young. After her mother's death, Emma took the role of being an elder sister very seriously. After all, Sarah had groomed her for this very day. Andrew was still recovering from the loss and was busy with his work. I don't think he was that attentive to his kids. Many ladies offered to help him mostly because of his wealth and good looks, but Andrew always refused. On June 6, 1865, Andrew married Abby Durfee, a 37-year-old spinster. Abby's life was not that good. Being 37 and unmarried was a curse for her. She was considered worthless in the society. She had no prospects or respect. When Andrew offered to marry her, she readily agreed. It was a mutual agreement of sorts. Andrew, who was then 43, wanted someone to look after his kids. I don't think he was looking for love. And Abby didn't seem to mind. She just wanted to marry someone and gain that respect from the society. They liked and respected each other. But I guess that was all. Abby and Andrew never had kids of their own. Now Abby gets a really bad rep in media. She's sometimes portrayed as the bad stepmother. But in reality, Abby was very close to the kids. At least she wanted to be close to the kids. She wanted to be a mother to them. Now I did watch a movie based on Lizzie's life, and to be honest, Abby was portrayed as a woman who couldn't bear to see Lizzie happy. I guess the media just wanted to show a softer side of Lizzie and give her a motive good enough to kill or to commit murder. Either ways, that was not how Abby was in real life. Abby thought it was easier to get close to Lizzie as she was too young to remember her real mother. But unfortunately, Abby was not welcome in the house. Emma had already taken up the role of the mother and she did not like someone else in that place. She kind of planted this seed of hatred towards Abby in Lizzie's mind. I sometimes believe that if it was not for Emma, Lizzie could have had a very good relationship with Abby and even found a mother in her. In 1866, Emma went to study at the Wheaton Female Seminary in northern Massachusetts. While here, she only got to meet Lizzie during the weekends. It's not close by, and I'm inclined to believe that Andrew may have sent his daughter there just to keep her away from Lizzie. Now, there were schools nearby, but they were also very expensive. and Andrew, being a penny pincher, could have seen it from that point of view. Maybe he sent her away because he didn't want to pay more fees, or maybe he sent her away because he thought that she was a bad influence on her sister. Now, Emma's school was 25 miles away. While Emma was not at home, Lizzie and Abby began to bond. Lizzie would write to Emma and say, "Mother and I did this, Mother and I did that." Emma would not have liked that. She was in school for a year and a half before she came back to pick up her role as Lizzie's mother. In 1873, Andrew moved to 92 2nd Street. It was a better place to where he lived before, and it was also close to his work. It was walking distance for him. The home was previously a double home or duplex. When the family moved in, they did not connect the two sides. They shared the living area downstairs, but the upstairs was separated. Andrew had his room on one side and the girls had their room on the other side. You can't get to the other room without going down the stairs and then going up the other side. Andrew and Abby's room can be accessed from the kitchen, and Lizzie and Emma's room can be accessed from the stairs from the main entryway or the sitting room. The top floor can be accessed by a main door, but this door was always locked. There were also some other doors to access the two parts, but some of these were boarded up while others had furniture pushed up against it. So basically, if you wanted to go from one side to another, you had to go all the way down, past the living room, and then all the way up the other staircase. Lizzie's bedroom was next to her father's bedroom, but she kept a big writing desk pushed up against the door. Now Lizzie was unhappy with life in 2nd Street as she wanted to live with her rich cousins. She wanted the life that they had. She wanted to meet people, find good men, and live a wealthy life. She was pissed because she knew that her father had the money and could afford that life, but he didn't want to. People over the years have said a lot about the Borden house, and it was blown out of proportion. They would make it seem like everyone was living in rags and living without electricity. But actually, the Bordens were not struggling. They didn't have fancy chandeliers or expensive furniture, but they had enough to live a comfortable life. It was only that Lizzie wanted more. The home used kerosene lamps when there was electricity. Some said they didn't have running water. They didn't at first, but as soon as the city had running water, Andrew was the first to get it for his house. In fact, Andrew was the first of many to get running water. The house had radiators and was centrally heated. They had plenty of food and the girls got monthly allowances, good clothes. They basically had a lot more than what people would say. In fact, Andrew got maids to help out in the house. He even sent Lizzie on a 1-year tour of Europe. They were very happy, and he did a lot for his life. He did not spend a lot of money or give them a lot of richness, but he did give them every single thing that a father would give to his daughters. But despite all this, Lizzie was not happy. Now Andrew was a self-made man, and he was very smart with his money. History has villainized Abby and Andrew as if giving Lizzie a reason to kill them. Now Lizzie would go and visit her cousins, but by evening she had to come back, and those were the times when these lavish parties would take place. It made Lizzie angry because she could not attend them. She was not invited because she did not live in that neighborhood, and no matter how hard she tried, Andrew would not budge. In school, Lizzie was average. She was moody and would often speak negatively about other people, including Abby. Her principal, Mr. Benson, moved into Andrew's neighborhood, and after the murders, he said that Abby was a very good woman and he had nothing bad to say about her. Lizzie was known to have a very sarcastic and sharp tongue, so she didn't have a lot of friends in school. She just had one friend, Alice. After her junior year at high school, she dropped out. She was active at the church and taught Sunday school and was very well respected. She was often at the church, a place that made her very happy. In 1887, she stopped calling Abby mother and started calling her Mrs. Borden or Mrs. B. And this was around the same time that Emma came back from her school. Emma didn't even bother calling her Mrs. Borden or Mrs. B. She directly called her Abby, which was very disrespectful, especially for that time. Today you might call your aunts, uncles by their names if they prefer. But back then it was very disrespectful to call a married woman by her name. In 1889, Bridget Sullivan, an Irish immigrant, was hired as a maid. But Emma and Lizzie called her Maggie. Now it is unclear why they called her Maggie. Maybe it was a nickname for her, or maybe they had a previous maid who was named Maggie and just didn't bother learning this one's name. Either ways, she was called Maggie. According to Bridget, the family never raised their voice, but the tension was always there. She wanted to quit many times, but Abby always paid her money to stay. Maybe because no one else other than Bridget wanted to talk to Abby. On June 24, 1891, the Borden home was broken into. Andrew went to the police and filed a report, and they looked into it. All the members were present at the home when the break-in happened. The only room that was broken in was Andrew and Abby's room. Andrew always locked the door, but this time they found it open and a 6 to 8 inch penny nail was stuck in the keyhole. The items missing were $80 in cash, $30 in gold, and Abby's gold watch and chain that were gifts from her family. Even though a lot of questioning was done by the police, they all said they didn't see anything. 2 weeks later, Andrew went to the police and stopped the investigation. The reason is unknown. After the break-in happened, Andrew would lock the room, but he would leave the key on the mantle. People believed it was his way of saying, "If you have the guts, come and steal." Now I don't know why only his room was broken into, and overall, why was only Abby's stuff stolen? It kind of makes me wonder if the whole robbery was staged and Abby was the intended victim. Now many people suspected Lizzie of robbing the house. She was a well-known shoplifter in town. She was so popular that if anything was stolen, the shopkeeper would send the bill to Andrew and he would pay. This was not good on his part as a father. It's also a surprise as Andrew, who was not that keen on spending money, quietly paid all of Lizzie's bills. It sounds very irresponsible to me. Lizzie and Andrew were very close and she would often go fishing with him. She helped him with his work and she also gifted him a gold ring which he wore till the day he died. Months before the murders, tension between the Borden sisters and Abby escalated. Abby's stepmother was given a house by her own father, Oliver Gray, and when he died, she decided to sell it. Now because of that, Abby's half-sister Sarah, her husband and kids had no place to go. Abby begged Andrew to purchase the home for her sister, and he did. He even put the house in Abby's name. This angered Lizzie. Emma and Lizzie told him verbatim, "What you did for Abby's family, you have to do it for us." This sounds like entitlement to me. Lizzie felt that she is entitled to a better house, a richer and better life. And now that Abby got something, she wants that too. After this whole house fiasco, Lizzie began to show anger towards Abby in public. To keep peace, Andrew gifted a house to Abby, the one that his father gave to him, the one on 12 Ferry Street, and the one where her mother died. Once again, back in those days, a woman could not stay unmarried for long, and what happened to Abby also started happening to Lizzie. And because of this, Lizzie could not move into a new home. She was forced to stay with her father. So Lizzie and Emma rented out this place that they got from their father and took the rent as their pocket money. After the property was settled, Andrew said, "I did this for you and I would really appreciate it if you could be good to Abby." They smiled and said okay, but later continued to show hatred towards Abby and her family. When you see someone you know or are related to on the street, you would immediately say hello. So when Abby's family would say hello to Lizzie or Emma, they would ignore them as if they were not present. This action spoke much louder than words. Basically, Lizzie Borden was a jerk. A few weeks before the murders, Lizzie and Emma sold the home back to their father for $5,000 and equally split the money between the two. It was a hard time then, and there was a huge flock of pigeons at that time, and Lizzie loved playing and taking care of them. Lizzie was said to be very humble and caring towards them. In June of 1892, Andrew killed all the pigeons. It's not known if he twisted their heads or cut them off, but he did it and then brought them into the house when Lizzie was there. It was for Bridget to cut their flocks and make stew. Some speculate that it was a way for Andrew to punish Lizzie for her behavior, but it's unknown. I believe it's not true because there were a lot of neighbor boys who loved throwing stones to trouble these birds, and some of those stones would hit and break the windows. In the days leading up to the deaths, the entire family came down with a stomach bug that left them weak and tired. They were nauseous and constantly throwing up. Rumors said that Andrew made them eat spoiled mutton to save it from being thrown out. But that's not true. In reality, they only ate the mutton on the morning they were killed. This was said by Bridget during her testimony. She said that a few days prior she had prepared swordfish and that caused the sickness. On August 2, everyone woke up feeling ill. Lizzie attempted to buy prussic acid, which is cyanide. The pharmacist testified that she came in and asked for that to clean a sealskin cape. He told her that she can't just purchase it and needed a prescription. She argued, but she wasn't given any. Abby was so sick that she decided to visit the family doctor, Seabury Bowen. Dr. Bowen had been their family physician for years and lived across the street. Abby was concerned and she told him that she was so sick that she thought someone was trying to poison them. He consoled her and told her that it was nothing but a minor stomach flu. On August 3rd, the family had an unexpected guest, John Winnecombe Morris, who was Sarah Borden's brother. He was quite close to Andrew and he had decided to visit and stay. He said he came around 1:30 in the afternoon and saw everyone except Lizzie and Emma. Now Emma was out of town visiting her friends. He had dinner and then left to run some errands, returning only by 8:30 that night. Abby went to bed, Andrew joined her sometime later, and finally John walked into his room. John said that while he was sitting in the living room, he heard someone come into the house, walk up the stairs, and open the door to the room, but he hadn't seen Lizzie. Later, when he walked up to his room, he had to pass by Lizzie's room and he said that the door was closed and he hadn't heard anything. It's debated to why he was there. Looking at the testimony and records, he was not an expected guest. Some say that he was there to talk about Andrew's will, but it's not proven. I read his testimony and he never mentioned anything about a will. On the night of August 3, Lizzie met her close friend Alice and told her everyone was sick at home except for Bridget. Alice asked Lizzie if it's something that they ate, for which she said maybe some baker's bread. And everyone ate it except Bridget, and only she was not sick, so maybe it was the baker's bread. Alice said that it couldn't be because baker's bread was something that everyone in town ate, and if there was something wrong with baker's bread, then everyone in town should have been sick. So no one was sick at that time. That meant that it was not baker's bread. Lizzie then replied to this by saying that it was probably in the milk. It's left at the doorstep every morning and maybe someone was poisoning it. Now Lizzie tells Alice something very disturbing. She says that they were all so sick and she said that she wasn't sick. She said, I wasn't throwing up, but I could hear them all throwing up. She said that she stepped to the doorway to Abby and Andrew's room door and asked if she could help, but they said no. It's weird because she told Alice that everyone ate the exact same food. So if everyone else is sick, why wasn't Lizzie sick? This thought came into my mind actually. She also said that she was afraid that someone wanted to harm her father. He had his business acquaintances and they were not very good to him. Now, this could be true because, as I said, Andrew Borden was not a nice man, so him having enemies was not something of a shocker. She then said that the barn had been broken into twice and the house was broken into once, and all of this happened in broad daylight when everyone was home. And she found that odd. Now, I find this odd too because the next thing that she said was, I feel as if I want to sleep with my eyes half open or they will burn the house down over us. Now, who is they? Lizzie never actually specified who they were. She said that she was scared that someone was trying to do something to her father, but she never specified who. At this point, I feel like Lizzie is setting her friend up to suspect that something might happen to her father. She's kind of laying this groundwork to say that someone was there, someone is trying to harm my father, so tomorrow something happens to my father, that someone did it. If you ask me, I feel like Lizzie is a really manipulative person. Now, whatever she said to Alice, she said it the day before the murders. So if Lizzie had to give some kind of clue to Alice that there is something bad that's going to come, then this is what she said. Now, on August 4th, the last living day of Andrew and Abby, the incidents go as something like this. So I'm going to give some detailed incidents of whatever happened on that day. John Morris woke up at 6 a.m. and he passed by Lizzie's room and found that the door was closed. Afterwards, he went down. After this, Andrew woke up and went down, and then Abby woke up. At 7 a.m., they all sat and had breakfast, which included some mutton, broth and Johnny cakes, coffee and cookies. The broth was mutton broth. After about 90 minutes of eating and chatting, they all got up. Andrew and John went to the living room to talk, and Abby began dusting. At 8:45, John went to leave and Andrew went to lock the door. This was common for everyone. John left around 8:48 a.m. to buy a pair of oxen and visit his niece in Fall River, planning to return to the Borden home for lunch at noon. Bridget woke up at around 6:30. It was a very hot day and she was sick. She got the breakfast ready. She saw Andrew take a slop bucket outside, dump it in the yard, and then go to the pear tree to collect some pears. Lizzie had not come down yet. Andrew then went to the door and let John out and locked the door behind him. He then came to the kitchen and brushed his teeth in the sink and then took a bowl of water up to his room, most likely to wash up because he had to go out and handle some business. 5 minutes after Andrew left, Lizzie came down to the kitchen. Bridget asked if she wanted to eat something, for which she said no. She was then offered some molasses cookies, which she readily agreed to eat along with some coffee. Bridget saw her take the coffee and sit down at the kitchen table, but then Bridget suddenly started to feel sick, so she ran out the kitchen door and towards the back to throw up. After she was done, she came back in, relatched the door, and then proceeded to do the dishes. At this point, Bridget sees Abby and she says you have to clean all the windows in the house and outside as they are dirty. Now Bridget is not happy because she's sick, but she agrees. This is the last time Bridget would see Abby alive. This was 9 a.m. Now Bridget goes down to the cellar, fills a bucket and then gets all the supplies and then goes to clean the windows. But then Lizzie comes and asks her, "Are you going to clean the windows?" For this, Bridget says, and this I'm going to read from her testimony which she has said in court. Quote, "As I was outside, Lizzie Borden appeared in the back entry and says, 'Maggie, are you going to wash the windows?' I says, 'Yes.' I says, 'You needn't lock the door. I will be out around here, but you can lock it if you want to. I can get the water in the barn.' I went to the barn to get the handle for the brush." End quote. Now, according to this, she tells Lizzie she will be outside so she doesn't have to lock the door. Now, these people were very big on locking doors, which meant that something had happened, or maybe there was a threat of some sorts. This too I couldn't find a lot of information on. If they were so big on locking doors, that means there was a very big threat around them. Now, Bridget started cleaning and also talking to one of the neighbor maids, but at no point did anyone go into the home. Once she was done with the outside windows, she went to do the inside windows. When she started in the sitting room, she saw Andrew Borden trying to get into the home, but the door wouldn't open. She tried to open the door, but the doors were latched from inside. She tried hard and suddenly heard a laughter coming from inside. It was Lizzie. Andrew would never come home this early, but because he was not feeling well, he decided to go home soon. After several attempts, Bridget got the door open and Andrew got in. Bridget then got back to work. Lizzie said he came in and read the paper and then went to take rest. This was still early morning. Bridget asked Lizzie where Mrs. Borden was, for which Lizzie said she got a note saying a friend was sick. Lizzie then came to the kitchen and took out an ironing board as if to iron something. Bridget asked who was the sick friend, but Lizzie said she didn't know anything. After this, Bridget started cleaning the windows. Once she was done, she went to clean and hang the racks. Lizzie came and asked Bridget, "Are you going out?" Bridget said maybe or maybe not. Now, of course, she was very sick, so I don't think she was planning to go out that day. Lizzie said there is a sale going on at Sargent's today and it's 8 cents for a yard of fabric. You should go and see. Bridget once again said that she was not well and she went up to rest. To me, it seems like Lizzie was trying to get Bridget out of the house because she kept asking her, "Are you going out?" And also she gave her this idea that there is a sale going on, so do you want to go and buy something? Either ways, Bridget did not go out. Bridget got into her room, laid down, and at that time she heard the town clock. She just couldn't rest. She claimed that she heard no sounds of the doors opening or closing, no one came into the house, no one went out. Now from Bridget's room, you can hear everything. She heard nothing until 10 minutes later into her rest when she heard Lizzie scream. Lizzie said, quote, "Maggie, come quick. Father is dead. Someone has come in and killed him." End quote. Bridget gets out of the bed and rushes down the stairs and sees Lizzie in the kitchen. When she starts to go into the living room, Lizzie asks her not to and to go and find Dr. Bowen. I don't understand why Lizzie couldn't go and get Dr. Bowen. But either ways, she sent Bridget. Bridget ran to Dr. Bowen's home, but he was not there. She then ran back to the Borden house and asked Lizzie what happened. Lizzie said that she was outside and she heard a groan coming from inside the house. She ran in and she saw that the door was open. Now, this story of Lizzie's is quite unlikely as Bridget was already inside the home while Lizzie was way outside. So the chances of Bridget hearing this groan was much more than Lizzie hearing it. But Bridget did not hear anything. A few minutes later, Lizzie asked Bridget to go and get Alice. Once again, this is my thoughts, my words that I'm saying. Now remember, she had told the previous day to Alice that someone was there, someone was trying to injure her father, or there was a threat to her father. So it does seem that now is the time, and she's telling Bridget, "Go run and get my friend and come." So Alice could be an alibi to prove that yes, there was some kind of threat and finally this person has delivered his threat. That's my words, my thoughts, what I think about this. Now when Bridget asked Lizzie why does she want Alice, she said that she didn't want to be alone in the house. Here also, I don't get why Lizzie is trying to get Bridget to go and get Dr. Bowen, to go and get Alice, if she was so afraid to stay in the house. Because every time she sends Bridget out, she is alone in the house. Her words don't make sense. With the current testimony, it seems like they were all in the living room discussing about what to do. There's a dead person in the house. Lizzie knows that, and yet she seems to, keep sending Bridget out. Why didn't they call the cops? Why didn't they call the neighbors? Why didn't they call someone else to just come? There is a dead body in the house. And moreover, the killer might still be in the house. It seems like they were least worried about that. So here we come to the end of part 1 of the Lizzie Borden series. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I had too, and I'm going to answer some of them in part 2, and then we are going to get a more clear picture in part 3. Thank you so much for listening to part 1, and I hope you enjoy part 2. Please let me know, what do you think? I have started my own YouTube channel under the same name, 3am Fear Podcast, so please do go over and check it out. It's going to be basically the same episodes but in video. Thank you so much for listening to part 1. Let's see how part 2 goes. That's it for the day. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to follow me on social media, especially Instagram. The links are in my description box. You can also find the episode show notes on my website 3amfear.com. If you love reading thrillers, you can now check out my free ebook available on my website. Once again, thank you so much for being here today, and see you next week. Have a great week and stay safe out there.